About uppers or stimulants. They're from chapter 3. So let's go ahead and get started. It's a long one. There's lots of them. Okay, in 2008, 5.6 million Americans used cocaine or cocaine products. 1.4 million Americans used methamphetamines for non-medicinal purposes. 83 million Americans used a tobacco product in 2008, including little kids. 166 million Americans drank coffee last year, mostly daily. Americans have averaged 56 gallons of soft drinks per person in 2008, most of them caffeinated. That is 598 12-ounce cans or 359 20-ounce bottles of pop. In 2008, 200 million people use betel nut. They brew it and drink it like coffee, or they chew it, and it turns their teeth a lovely shade of red to black. In Southeast Asia, especially Thailand, the area is having a severe problem with a form of methamphetamine called yaba. In the area around the Horn of Africa, the majority of the male population and much of the female population chew khat, a mild stimulant. 1.3 billion people worldwide smoke cigarettes. Natural stimulants, there are natural stimulants. Cocaine comes from the coca shrub. Nicotine comes from tobacco plants. Cathinone comes from khat bushes. Ephedrine comes from the ephedra bush. Ericoline comes from betel nuts. And caffeine comes from coffee plants. Synthesized stimulants, methamphetamines, diet pills, methylphenidate, which is the chemical name for Ritalin, the ADHD drug, and methcathinone. Stimulants increase the activity in the central nervous system. It boosts your energy, it raises heart rate and blood pressure, it increases your respiration, it reduces appetite, and it subdues thirst. Sounds like a great drug. They may make the user more alert, more active, more confident, more anxious, more restless, more aggressive. Stimulants are used to treat narcolepsy, obesity, and ADHD. Stimulants work by affecting 4 neurotransmitters. Norepinephrine, which increases your energy. Epinephrine, which increases your energy. Norepinephrine, which increases confidence, feelings of well-being, and motivation. Serotonin, which increases energy. And dopamine, which increases your energy as well. Most of the neurons affected by epinephrine and norepinephrine are located in an area of the midbrain called the locus coeruleus. And the locus coeruleus is right there, right in the middle of your midbrain. This portion of the brain networks with many parts of the rest of the brain. When the body needs an extra jolt of energy, epinephrine and norepinephrine are released to provide that energy. When the individual takes uppers, if it forces the release of the energy chemicals. These drugs cause the body to react to stress that doesn't exist and makes the individual talkative, hyperactive, and hypervigilant. Kind of like Barney Fife. The stronger the stimulant, the longer it takes the body to recover. Large quantities over long periods of time deplete the body's energy stores and leaves the body without reserves. Withdrawal from stimulants can create severe depression that can last for days, weeks, or even months. People tend to build a fairly rapid tolerance to the stimulant, forcing the individual to consume more and more of the substance. Even coffee will require more and more with increased consumption. The reward reinforcement pathway is a natural structure that informs the individual of an activity or substance that supports survival. Hunger is satiated, thirst is satiated, sexual desire is satiated. When a strong stimulant is used, it overstimulates the reward reinforcement pathway and the body doesn't respond to hunger, thirst, or sexual activity. The brain cannot be satisfied. As more and more of the stimulant is used, tolerance builds and the rush in the stimulation diminishes. But what does remain is the emotional memory of the effects of the stimulant. This is accomplished by the dopamine stimulation in the reward reinforcement pathway. One of the side effects of long-term stimulant usage can be dehydration and malnourishment. The hypothalamus regulates thirst and hunger. Stimulants fool this part of the brain to think that the individual is neither hungry or thirsty. This can lead to deficiencies of vitamins and minerals as well as damage to the teeth. And this is a lady who, this was the first time they arrested her for cocaine use or for methamphetamine usage in 1995. And you can see how young she looks by the time this picture was taken in 2002. 7 years later, she looked much older. It looks like she aged much more rapidly than she should have. Shaun Wise, when he was 20 years old, he became addicted to methamphetamine. He's been sober for 2 years. This is him. You may remember him. He was with the Mighty Ducks. The movie. He was in the movie Mighty Ducks. This is what he looked like when he was about as low as you can go. Let's get rid of that. There we go. Originally he was big. Then he was really skinny. And now he's sober for 2 years and doesn't have any teeth. So, lost his teeth to methamphetamines. Shaun Wise. Stimulants, including the weaker ones like nicotine and caffeine, induce vascular spasms and constrict blood flow to organs and tissue. Heavy smokers will have a pasty complexion due to the restricted blood flow. This restricted blood flow will slow tissue repair and the healing process. Chronic use of stimulants will weaken blood vessels and increasing the risk of stroke. So, they can hurt you a lot, even cigarettes, especially cigarettes. But at least the stimulant user has increased confidence and stimulated feelings of euphoria. They're talkative, they're restless, they're irritable, they have insomnia, they become paranoid, they become aggressive and violent. Wait a minute, those aren't positive things. But that's what happens to people who use stimulants excessively. Prolonged use of high doses of methamphetamine can lead to a clinical level of paranoia or kick the individual into psychosis. Meth increases the dopamine in the central nervous system. One of the conditions of schizophrenia is an overabundance of dopamine receptor sites. Sometimes the meth user will drift into permanent schizophrenia, and this happened to a student of mine when I was teaching up on the Fort Belknap Reservation. She was very sensitive to crystal meth. When she was living in Great Falls, Montana, she was a user, and she was starting to have problems. She was starting to have a lot of problems. So she came back to the reservation. When she came back to the reservation, she stopped using crystal meth. And then her father got caught under a haymaker and punctured him in several places on his body. And so they rushed him to the hospital in Havre, and then they ran him down to Great Falls. So of course she had to go down there to be with her father. And when she was in Great Falls, of course, that triggered the need to use crystal meth. She started using crystal meth. And the next thing she knew, she didn't know who she was. She thought she was a Hispanic lady, and of course she wasn't. She was part Yupik. She was of Alaskan origin, Alaska Native origin, and Grovon, the Aani Nin who live on the Fort Belknap Reservation. She was a mixture of the two. And all of a sudden she thought she was Hispanic. She even started speaking Spanish or saying things that sounded like Spanish. And of course, um, one of the things that happened, she decided that her father had murdered her mother, and so they she told them exactly where the body was, and so they went into this person's backyard and started digging up the backyard. Didn't find anything because her mother was still alive. Her father had just died, however. That's one of the reasons that she'd gone down to Great Falls because of the problems he was having, and eventually he passed away. And so she claimed that her father killed her mother, even though her mother was still alive and her father was dead. Anyway, eventually, after about 3 or 4 days, she was with the police most of that time, and after 3 or 4 days, she snapped out of it, luckily, and uh, they charged her with filing a false report. And eventually she came back to Fort Belknap, and the next time I saw her, she told me what happened, and I told her, you can't use that stuff again. If you use that stuff again, you may become that Hispanic lady permanently. And the last I heard, that she was staying off the stuff, but she was having problems with anxiety. She was having panic attacks, as weird as that is. Anyway, so they started giving her another medication. Not important. Nicotine provides almost immediate tolerance. All stimulants in a slower but similar manner develop tolerance rapidly. Dependence is developed with tolerance since the need becomes greater and greater. Nicotine has the strongest dependence level, as we have already discovered. Cocaine is synthesized from the coca leaf since its introduction in South America with the invasion of the Incas in Peru. It has enjoyed epidemics and lag periods. The first epidemic was at the end of the 19th century. The famous author Robert Louis Stevenson wrote the novel The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde in 6 days while taking cocaine as a treatment for tuberculosis. Many have speculated that the two personalities represented in the novel actually represented Stevenson on and off the stimulant. Stevenson may have written the novel to explain to friends his change of personality. And of course, he eventually died of tuberculosis. But he was on cocaine for part of that time. Cocaine won't grow just anywhere like marijuana can. I've got a marijuana plant growing in my fence row back there, and its roots are so deep I can't pull it out of the ground. But I'll cut it down later. It's just ditchweed, but it is marijuana. So it'll grow. Marijuana grows everywhere. But cocaine, not so much. Cocaine grows in the moderately high slopes of the Andes Mountains really, really well. So it grows in Peru, Bolivia, Ecuador, and Colombia. There are other places that it can grow. Some of the islands of Java and Indonesia, you can grow cocaine there, but the coca shrub. But it's got to be up in the mountains. Coca leaves don't contain very much alkaloid cocaine. 1 acre of 6 to 8 foot bushes will only produce 1.5 to 2 kilograms. That's about 3 to 4.5 pounds of cocaine. Cocaine refinement begins with stage 1, soaking the leaves in alkali and water. Stage 2 of cocaine refinement is where the workers add gasoline, acetone, or kerosene to create a paste. Stage 3 involves discarding the waste leaves and adding an acid such as hydrochloric or sulfuric acid. In stage 4, the cocaine paste is mixed with lime and ammonia. The last stage is separating the cocaine hydrochloride from the paste. Smuggling cocaine into the United States has been a constant cat and mouse game between smugglers and the DEA since the 1970s. During the Reagan administration, a friend of the president's was killed by smugglers to steal his yacht, and since then, the military has been used to stop mass shipments coming in by plane and shipped from South America. And actually, last week, There was what was it? It was like $24 million worth of cocaine was caught by the Mexican Navy. Caught them in the Gulf of Mexico. They were on speedboats, as weird as that may seem. Anyway, the Mexican Navy were able to stop them and seize the shipment, and it was the largest shipment they've ever found. This to the left is a submarine that was built to smuggle cocaine that they captured. Somebody captured. Looks like the United States military. Today, there is only one sure route into the United States, and that is along the porous border with Mexico. Colombian drug cartels smuggle about 2/3 of their produce in this manner. The last third continues to come over by sea. North America consumes 40 to 50% of the world's cocaine. Way to go, Americans. When I was teaching at Tinker Air Force Base, one of my students, how can I explain this? He was Mexican American and he spoke Spanish fluently, but his wife was from Bolivia, and because his wife was from Bolivia, he had picked up all this South American slang, and one of the things that they do in South America or with the drug cartels, the Colombians. It's mostly Colombian drug cartels. They use a lot of slang, and because he knew Bolivian slang, he was able to interpret some of the things that were going on. So they sent him to South America, and he got aboard an AWACS where they intercepted radio transmissions. And from time to time, he communicated with me. He was mostly up in the AWACS, but they let him go in on a raid, and evidently they gave him a shotgun, sawed-off shotgun, and of course he didn't feel very safe because a shotgun can't shoot for very far. But I guess you don't want to give Air Force personnel too much firepower. They'll shoot themselves probably. Anyway, he. Last I heard, he was doing fine, and he was intercepting drug traffickers between the United States and South America. It is estimated that Americans spent $36.1 billion on cocaine in 2004. In 2019, the figure was $150 billion. Cocaine in the United States averages 84% purity, with prices ranging from $12,000 to $35,000 per kilogram. A kilogram is 2.2 pounds. So, wow. That's a brick. It's what they refer to as a brick, and it comes as a brick. I don't seem to have, wait a minute. I don't seem to have an arrow. There we go. I've got an arrow. That's a brick. That's 2.2 pounds. There are 1,000 grams in a kilogram. The street value of 1 gram of cocaine is $50 to $200, with an average purity of about 57%. And this is what a gram looks like in a baggie, and that's what a dime looks like. So you can see how big it is. Crack cocaine comes in rocks of 1/10 of a gram to 1/2 a gram, and sell for $10 to $20 each rock. I was working in Omaha when crack cocaine hit the streets in the United States back in the early 80s. Bit of a surprise because we had started controlling the cocaine trafficking into the United States, and all of a sudden we started seeing crack cocaine. Working in the emergency room, this is kind of a serious problem, but we saw a lot of it where we were. We were a major trauma center in Omaha. That's where I worked. Hardcore cocaine users will spend an average of $186 per week on cocaine. Cocaine is actually cheaper than it ever has been. Well, maybe not now that they intercepted all that cocaine in those speedboats. Thank you, Russian Navy. Thank you, Mexican Navy. It is estimated that there are probably over 3 million hardcore cocaine users in the United States. The man to the left is pitchman Billy Mays. He OD'd on cocaine at age 51. So he's no longer the voice of OxyClean. He used to yell at you that you needed to buy OxyClean. And kaboom, an Orange Clear. When the Spanish first arrived in South America, they found many people in the Andes Mountains chewing coca leaves. Most of the Inca users actually mixed the juice with lime from ground shell or ash to accelerate the introduction of the alkaloid into the brain. Introduction occurs in about 3 to 5 minutes after you chew the coca leaves. And I've been to, I've been to Peru, not to Colombia. But these are individuals on the Inca Trail in Peru. They're porters, and theoretically they chew coca leaves. When we went down there, coca leaves are all over the place. You can rent them. Not rent them. You can buy them if you want. We landed in Cuzco. Cuzco is above Machu Picchu. Actually, it's actually higher. It's like at 8,000 feet. Machu Picchu's at 5,000 feet. So we landed at Cuzco, and as soon as we landed, there were people trying to sell us coca leaves, and of course, some of the people. I was on a Fulbright trip, and some of the individuals bought it. I didn't, and my buddy didn't buy it either. We were the ones that were running up and down the mountains, so so we figured if we should probably be in good enough shape to be able to handle the elevation and whatnot, and we did. We had no problem. It only took like 10 or 15 minutes before we were totally assimilated to the high altitude. We went up. The highest we went was about 10,000 feet. And the air the oxygen up there is it's pretty rare. Cuzco, some of the individuals had a hard time walking around Cuzco, but we didn't. Anyway, and this is the Inca Trail. They built this road, this rock road that they transported with porters and whatnot. Anyway, the Inca. The conquistadores encouraged use of coca to increase the productivity of their Quichua workers, their Indian workers. That's the indigenous people of that area. In 1859, Albert Newman isolated the active ingredient in coca leaves, cocaine hydrochloride. Isolated this substance was 200 times more powerful by weight than coca leaf. The drug was first used as an anesthetic and a medicine to treat depression, tuberculosis, gastric disorder, and asthma. And one of the individuals using it to treat depression was Sigmund Freud. Cocaine wine was popular in France and Italy in the late 1860s. This ushered in the first modern cocaine epidemic, as 2 glasses of wine delivered the same amount of cocaine as a line of coke. It took 15 to 30 minutes for the cocaine to take effect after ingesting in this manner. So coca wine was very popular in the late 19th century. By the 1880s, patented medicines and drinks began to appear laced with cocaine, opium, morphine, heroin, cannabis, and alcohol. Since no one really understood addiction or the real power of the supplements in their tonics, many people became addicted, especially women. There you go. Cocaine toothache drops. Can't argue with that. People began introducing cocaine into their systems in new ways. Injecting intravenously introduces the drug into the system in 30 seconds. Snorting cocaine introduces the substance into the blood in 2 to 5 minutes. Snorting more cocaine is counterproductive, as the drug is a vasoconstrictor. So once introduced into the nasal passage, it slows the absorption of any new cocaine. As the cocaine wears off, the nasal passage opens back up, causing a running and sniffling nose. Smoking cocaine-laced cigarettes were introduced in 1914, but the high temperature of the cigarettes destroyed most of the psychoactive substance. And this is one of the ways you can tell if somebody has been snorting cocaine. After 5 to 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, their nose starts to run and they're constantly sniffling all the time. And I'm not snorting cocaine. I'm drinking Mountain Dew. Okay, so the other thing, it's a vasoconstrictor. So if you snort too much cocaine, one of the things that will happen, it will destroy the septum in your nose. The septum is the cartilage between your two nostrils, and it will cause a hole to form because it kills the tissue. And so some people will have to have their nose rebuilt. A notorious cocaine snorter was Linda Ronstadt. Linda Ronstadt had to have her nose redone twice, rebuilt twice because of she snorted too much cocaine. As tragic as all that is, and now she of course has it's a Parkinsonian disease. It's not actually Parkinsonism. It's something that's extremely rare, and it may have something to do with her snorting cocaine. Another individual who snorted a lot of cocaine was John Denver. Eventually, he died in a plane crash. And Michael J. Fox. Michael J. Fox, who developed Parkinson's disease when he was in his 30s. I mean, that's really unheard of. But cocaine, of course, accelerates things, just like speed does. Because cocaine is a natural substance, it tends to be metabolized very quickly, and its effects dissipate much faster than synthetic stimulants. The half-life of cocaine is 30 to 90 minutes and is detectable in the urine up to 36 hours after ingestion. Cocaine is used as a topical anesthetic because of its powerful vasoconstriction capabilities. And if you've ever watched a television show where the police think that somebody's been using cocaine, they'll rub their finger on the powder and then they'll rub it on their gums. And the reason they're doing that is they're trying to find out if the powder it numbs their gums. If it does, then it's probably cocaine. And that's the reason they do that. They'll touch it to their tongue. And if it numbs that portion of your tongue, then you know it was probably cocaine. Since cocaine receptors are found in the smooth muscles of the lungs, cocaine use will cause the bronchi to dilate. Synthetic cocaine products mimic the effect of cocaine for eye, dental, and cutaneous surgeries. This is done with lidocaine, procaine, xylocaine, and of course Novocaine that they inject into your jaw in order to do dental work. Cocaine excites the user by blocking the reuptake of the neurotransmitter acetylcholine, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine. The abundance of these neurotransmitters gives the individual a feeling of well-being, mastery, omnipotence, euphoria, and general excitement. Cocaine metabolizes fairly rapidly, leaving the 4 neurotransmitters vulnerable to reuptake when the cocaine is gone. Cocaine's positive effects disappear fairly suddenly after 5 or 10 minutes. This absence of the previous feeling is referred to as the crash and may last for hours, days, or even weeks. Cocaine overstimulates the release of dopamine. If this occurs over time, it triggers the fright center in the brain, causing paranoia. Cocaine also overstimulates, which is what happened to my student. She became paranoid, and she also became psychotic to the extent that she thought she was a Hispanic woman whose father had just murdered her mother, or had actually murdered her mother 5 or 6 years before. And the truth was her father had just died and her mother was still alive. Cocaine also overstimulates the release of epinephrine and norepinephrine. If this occurs over time, the individual may suffer from lethargy, low blood pressure, and anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. The inability to feel pleasure. Why in the world would somebody do something to themselves that would make them unable to feel pleasure in the future? That just is so bizarre to me. Cocaine causes the overstimulation of serotonin, which not only makes the individual happy, but increases sexual activity as well. If this continues to happen over time, the individual may suffer from insomnia, agitation, and severe emotional depression. Cocaine blocks the metabolism of acetylcholine, increasing alertness, memory, and aggression. If overstimulation occurs over time, the person may suffer from tremors, memory lapses, mental confusion, and possibly hallucinations. Some people actually use cocaine as an aphrodisiac, since at low doses it enhances sexual desire and prolongs ejaculation. However, in some cases it causes spontaneous ejaculation. In higher doses, and with chronic use, cocaine may cause erectile dysfunction and a disinterest in sex. The lack of sexual need may lead to high risk sexual behavior and unusual sexual practices, since sexual need no longer exists for the individual. For cocaine users who are prone to violence, cocaine makes them more aggressive and violent because inhibitory functions are suppressed in the cingulate gyrus and the temporal lobes. Emotional triggers are overstimulated in the amygdala. The fright center is hyperactivated in the limbic system. When cocaine is combined with alcohol, the result is a substance called cocaethylene, which causes increased agitation, euphoria, and violence. In one study of domestic violence, all the perpetrators had used alcohol on the day of the violence, and 67% had used cocaine with the alcohol. Cocaethylene is also more likely to induce heart conduction anomalies that may lead to a heart attack. This substance has a half-life 3 times that of cocaine and therefore can cause prolonged high blood pressure. And yeah, so drinking alcohol and snorting cocaine, really a bad idea. While the brain gains feelings of euphoria and well-being from cocaine, the heart is being abused by this substance. Cocaine causes the heart rate to increase and the blood vessels to constrict. Remember, it's a vasoconstrictor. This raises the blood pressure 20 to 30 units. Small muscle repair stops during its use. The stress on the heart and the muscle damage being done by its use can cause damage to the heart muscle, coronary arteries, and other blood vessels of the heart. Prolonged high blood pressure weakens blood vessel walls in the brain, leading to stroke. Cocaine also causes a curious condition where calcium and fat deposits collect in blood vessels, causing heart attacks or stroke. Wow, that sounds nasty. Cocaine crosses the placental barrier, meaning that when mom uses, her fetus uses also within seconds. Damage is done to the fetus's blood vessels in a similar reaction to that of the mother and may result in miscarriage, stroke, placental separation, and if the baby is born semi-normal to some extent, it may develop SIDS later on. When I was working at Children's Hospital in Omaha in the early 80s, we were seeing the first wave of cocaine usage in the middle of America in Omaha, Nebraska. And a lot of the wealthy people in town, the wealthiest people in town, were using cocaine on a fairly regular basis. Now, some of these people were fairly young and they were having children. And sadly, a lot of the children were born with abnormalities. And of course, we were the ones that got all these kids. It was quite a eye-opening experience. If you don't want your kid, don't snort. If you want your kid, don't snort cocaine. If you don't want him, then go ahead and snort the cocaine because he probably isn't going to survive. And that's exactly what happened. Most of them didn't survive, the babies, and it was not a pleasant situation. One study looking at 717 babies born to cocaine using mothers found that they were born on an average 1.2 weeks early, 1.2 pounds lighter, 1 inch shorter, The head that is 3/4 of an inch smaller in circumference on average. The babies are born agitated, irritable, with high blood pressure. The baby is usually malnourished because that is the lifestyle of the cocaine and amphetamine user. Escaping from the cocaine-soaked placental environment does not remove the child from danger. Stimulant users often are often inattentive and uncaring about the needs of others, and this includes their infants, which results in emotional deprivation for the child, neglect of the child, and bonding problems. Studies show that rates of mental delays are double among stimulant-exposed children. All is not bleak. With concentrated postnatal care, these infants catch up with their peers by toddlerhood if they survive to that point. When I was teaching in Oklahoma City, I ran into the first two crack babies. They had just made it into middle school. I don't know how they ever made it into middle school. Both of them suffered from ADHD, really, really bad ADHD. Anyway, that's another story. Tolerance of the euphoric effects begins with the first usage of cocaine. Of course, a lot of times these new drugs hit the market or old drugs hit the market and they become popular and nobody knows what's going to happen. And so the people that find out what's going to happen are medical personnel and the teachers. And that's one of the reasons why I ran into the first crack baby in Oklahoma, and this was in the 90s. I'm trying to think when. 91? Yeah, 91. He was 12, I think. His mother was a stripper. Interesting. Tolerance of the euphoric effect begins with the first usage of cocaine. Increased usage has been seen of 25 times the level within days. This is due to the adaptation of the brain to dopamine stimulation in the nucleus accumbens. Tolerance is to the euphoric effect only since paranoia increases, as does cardiovascular effects. Withdrawal from cocaine use is very real, despite the misperceptions of researchers into the 1990s. Because it was so rapid, they didn't think it was addictive, but of course it is. It just leaves you very quickly, and so the withdrawals were relatively fast. All the crash symptoms become accelerated and prolonged depending on the dosage used, frequency of use, and the length of use. Anhedonia, which means you can't find pleasure in anything. Lack of energy, emotional depression. This is the crashing. Emotional depression, loss of motivation, anxiety, vivid and unpleasant dreams, insomnia, increased appetite, psychomotor agitation, intense craving for the drug. And that's the withdrawal from cocaine. It's the same for methamphetamine. Cycle of quitting and relapse of stimulants. After a binge session with the drug, the individual crashes, sleeps for a prolonged period, awakens with renewed energy, and swears off the drug forever. The individual feels better for a few days and begins to feel as they did before they began using the drug. 7 to 10 days after quitting, the craving starts to build, energy levels drop, emotional depression sets in as they can find no pleasure in their surroundings. After a couple of weeks or a month, they relapse, not being able to deal with the depression or the ever-increasing craving. And the anhedonia doesn't go away. This is the problem, and it's going to stay there. It's going to stay with this individual for as much as 18 months. While cocaine overdoses are common, because of the rapid metabolization, the effects are rarely fatal. In large city emergency rooms in 2004, 41% of the visits were due to cocaine usage, most because the individual felt as if they were dying. Remember, it's a vasoconstrictor. It makes your heart palpate. The U.S. averages between 2,000 to 3,000 stimulant deaths every year, either from the initial stimulatory stage that causes seizures, hypertension, hyperthermia, stroke, or tachycardia, or later with the depression stage from the extreme respiratory depression and coma. Some people will experience inverse tolerance where they become more sensitive to cocaine's effects without their knowledge, of course. Long-term cocaine or amphetamine usage may lead to tactile hallucinations called formications, the sensation that there are tiny bugs crawling on the user's skin. And why is this? It is because your hair follicles are standing on end. And when they do that, it feels like there's something crawling on your skin. So what these individuals will do, they'll scratch themselves bloody trying to rid themselves of the imaginary pests. This is bizarre. My wife picked up a friend's child, and he was on crystal meth. And he was a really nice kid, despite the fact he was on crystal meth. Him and his friend, and this was up in Montana. She picked him up, and he scratched the entire time. It was about 30 miles back to the reservation, and he just scratched the whole time. Being nice to my wife, of course. He was a pretty nice fella. And it looks like this. I mean, it really does. They'd scratch themselves bloody. Cocaine and amphetamine usage may also cause dental problems for the user. This usually is caused by poor nutrition, poor dental hygiene, and the acidic effects of the drugs. The individual also tends to suffer dehydration that causes the gums to recede, which is always attractive. Seizures are sometimes caused by excessive cocaine or amphetamine usage. 2 to 10% of cocaine users will have seizures, 3 times more women than men. They don't have as much fat in their body or muscle in their body. They don't have as much water. Cocaine and amphetamine users they have more fat, but not as much mass. Cocaine and amphetamine users can sometimes suffer from gastrointestinal problems, gastric ulcers, retroperitoneal fibrosis, visceral infarction. The peritoneum is the part of your stomach that surrounds your intestines. Fibrosis means it becomes fibroid. It becomes non-functional. It becomes fibrous. It's supposed to be mucous membrane, but it becomes fibrotic. And sometimes it will die and it will open up, and that's not good. Visceral infarctions. Infarction means death. So your viscera dies. Intestinal ischemia. Gastrointestinal tract perforation. Colonic ischemia. Yeah, so it can either be in your small, and you can have areas of stroke or blood clots in your intestines or your colon. Another possible side effect of cocaine usage comes from dopamine changes in the cerebellum from cocaine or amphetamine toxicity. The individual suffers from involuntary writhing, flailing, jerking, or sinuous movements of the arms and legs. This is sometimes referred to as meth or crack dancing, and I'm going to show you a YouTube video of a man doing that very thing.
What we have is a claim by the plaintiff that the defendant is obligated to her for failure to pay back rentals, utilities, and also for the cost of
It's the man that has it, not her.
paternity test that the two of them engaged in. Apparently, the two of them have taken the test and directed that it be furnished to me for my inspection with whomever. Well, in other words, if he's not the father, then she pays. If he is the father, she gets paid.
He'll be paying.
That's good. That's good.
Don't get in here.
That ain't bad.
Don't get in here and show out.
Well, yes,
I'm not going to try it in the court.
Well, just chill just a little
Yes, sir.
bit. Right?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, Your Honor. Judge Joe Brown.
You know how to act better.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I ain't trying to show out.
Stop. Would you stop?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay, I'll try not.
Can you hold still, or are you under the influence?
Under the influence.
Hey,
Under the influence.
not right now.
Under the influence.
But that woman there, she done drove me down influence a lot of things that I said I'd never do.
He gonna lie.
Oh, how can I? When it's the truth. God knows.
Oh,
I wouldn't bring him into it.
You please.
Excuse me. How would you take care of him if officially you're unemployed? What's
Thank
your
you.
I wasn't
Thank
employed then.
You were
I
unemployed.
wasn't unemployed then.
Yes, you were.
But I was selling
No,
dope.
excuse me, Your Honor. He was doing that, but he was receiving his daughter's Social Security checks for her mother's death, and he wasn't giving me none like that.
Everybody
Did
knew
you,
I know.
excuse me, were you, let him go, let
I'm
him
going. I'm
let him
telling
keep
the truth.
talking.
I'm telling the truth. Okay. Yes, ma'am.
Miss Sonia, let him go. I have a purpose. You're showing a classic example. All that kinetic
I'm sorry,
movement
I'm
from
sorry,
having
Your Honor.
too much energy
This just,
from
I'm
what
sorry, but it's just
are
hard on me when
still
someone
showing
says
the
something.
residual effects from. So you've already said that you were moving merchandise.
I'm not lying. I'm not denying. I'm here to tell the truth. Didn't I say? Didn't I raise my right hand? I don't care who hears the truth. The only one can condemn me is God. But Your Honor,
You may get a little remark. He worketh in mysterious ways.
Don't he? Don't he?
Yes.
He does. He works through you right now. What have you decided?
You candidly admitted that you've been moving merchandise.
Oh, hey, Arkansas know it. Who don't know it?
When's the last time you've been selling?
I ain't sold no dope in a long time, Your Honor. I've been smoking dope, and the reason why. You want to know the reason why? For 38 years, I said I never smoked no dope. For 38 years. But I found out one thing. Never say what you won't do.
The symptoms he is exhibiting, in my experience, he is actively under the influence.
Mm-hmm.
He's a crackhead.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. I even admitted that.
No, he don't. No, he didn't.
Not at first.
No, he didn't.
He
But now
was
I
under
did
the
it now.
impression this is a nice, interesting little thing on a TV show. He's under oath. He is, in fact, a retired deputy sheriff.
Ain't no
And,
secret. I got lessons selling dope.
excuse me, the testimony here that you give is under oath, subject to penalties of perjury.
There you go.
Excuse me. And what I have here is a confession by somebody that looks like they're still on extended parole as a habitual offender after having a long...
I've been out of the joint a long time ago.
Not long.
Okay, that's enough. We saw him dance. That's crack dancing. Schizophrenia is caused from too much dopamine in the mesolimbic pathway. It is normally caused by a hereditary imbalance of a disease state that affects this area. Since cocaine and amphetamines increase dopamine in this area, it can trigger stimulant-induced paranoid schizophrenia. The main effects are auditory, visual, or tactile hallucinations and paranoid delusions. Stimulant-induced psychosis is imposed to differentiate with organic psychosis. Psychotic symptoms may disappear with abstinence, but it may take hours, days, or even months. And that's what happened to my friend. She used, or from my ex-student in Montana, she used and she became paranoid. And she changed her identity. 1/3 to one, and she's got 2 kids. That was the bizarre part. 1/3 to 1/2 of chronic cocaine users will develop mild transient paranoia. With repeated use after a psychotic episode, smaller and smaller doses will trigger psychotic episodes. Polydrug use is very common among cocaine users because the individual may need chemical assistance to come down off their stimulation. The most common drugs used with cocaine are alcohol, heroin, sedative hypnotics, and nicotine. A person who smokes cigarettes is 22 times more likely to use cocaine than a non-smoker. While the purity of cocaine coming into the country averages 80 to 90%, most marketed cocaine has been cut with substances to increase profits. They use baby laxatives, lactose, vitamin B, aspirin, mannitol, sugar, tetracaine, and procaine in order to cut the cocaine. Injecting any drug is dangerous, but injecting street drugs is especially so. The user can never be sure of the purity of the drug. The drug may be contaminated with dangerous substances that are not meant to be introduced into the human body. Bacteria and viruses may be introduced. 50 to 90% of IV drug users are infected with hepatitis C from using contaminated needles. And that's what happened to my student. She had hepatitis C, and she was afraid she was going to die from it. The reason she had hepatitis C was because a friend of hers got into her stash and shot up with her cocaine or with her methamphetamines, and didn't tell her and didn't clean the needle properly, so she got infected with the hepatitis C the next time she used the needle. Manufacturers now, of course, they have a treatment for hepatitis C. It's not something that will kill you now like it did in the past. Manufacturers and refiners of cocaine have known that in the paste or freebase state, cocaine could be smoked without destroying the euphoric properties. When freebase is mixed with marijuana and smoked, it is referred to as bazooka, basuco, or pasta. This form of ingestion gives the user a more intense and immediate effect than snorting. Crack or freebase has 4 properties that make it a sought commodity. The melting point is higher, 195 degrees, as compared to the powder, which is 98 degrees. It reaches the brain faster when smoked. This form is more readily absorbed by the fat cells in the brain, giving it a more intense reaction. Higher doses of cocaine can be ingested in a shorter period of time. Any smoked cocaine product will produce a more intense effect than snorted cocaine. This is true even though most of the cocaine product is lost in the air, 75% in a pipe and 50% in a cigarette. Hence, more cocaine has to be smoked to get a strong effect. Even when cocaine is smoked or injected, the drug is metabolized rapidly, 15 to 20 minutes, and must be renewed to get a strong effect. Crack gives a rush that only lasts a few seconds and euphoria and excitation that only last a few minutes, 5 to 20 minutes. As soon as the effect dissipates, the individual feels irritable, dysphoric, which is another word for uneasy, and anxious. For this reason, crack is almost always smoked in a binge pattern, and that's one of the reasons why people don't share their crack. Crack does have some fairly unpleasant side effects: thirst, coughing, tremors, dry skin, slurred speech, blurred vision, crack keratitis, abrasion of the eye, cracked thumb and hands, burns on the hand and callus on the thumb from lighting a crack pipe, crack burns, facial burns from lighting the pipe. Psychological side effects of smoking crack: paranoia, craving for the drug, asocial behavior, attention problems, irritability, drug dreams, hyperexcitability, visual and auditory hallucinations, depression, cocaine psychosis, high-risk sexual behavior. Respiratory side effects from smoking crack: chest pains, pneumonia, coughs, cracked lung, decreased ability to diffuse CO2, hemorrhage, respiratory failure, death due to anesthetization of the respiratory center in the medulla. Crack or freebase can be mixed with marijuana to create caviar, champagne, grimmies, fry daddies, Cocoa Puffs, Hubba, or Woolies. Those are all names for the same thing. Users may combine crack with PCP or ketamine to make space basing, whack, or tragic magic. All names for either one of those. Mixing crack with tar heroin creates speedballs, hot rocks, or Belushi rocks. Why Belushi rocks? Because John Belushi died from mixing crack with heroin. Speedballing is what they called it. So they call it Belushi rocks. When crack or cocaine is mixed with wine, it is called crack coolers. In 2004, 4,500 deaths occurred from the direct or indirect effects of cocaine. Cocaine overdose doesn't always kill, but results in tachycardia and hyperventilation accompanied by a feeling of impending death. Death usually results from cardiac arrest, seizures, stroke, respiratory failure, or hyperthermia. Social consequences: because using crack can lead to risky sexual behavior, children are sometimes produced in circumstances that are not optimum. Crack smokers have social problems and they don't relate to their own offspring any better than they do to anybody else. Crack smokers show high rates of neglect, abandonment, and abuse of their children. There are high rates of single and no-parent families. Women willing to trade sex for crack are very common, and then it all starts over again. And the reality is, if they're willing to trade their own having sex with somebody for crack, they're also willing to sell their children for crack. Sell their children, they can prostitute their children. This has been known to happen on the Navajo Nation. And they also actually sell their children to people. This happened on the Belknap Reservation. On the Rocky Boy Reservation, somebody sold their children for crack. And of course, they sold it was a little girl and a little boy, and they sold them for sexual purposes. Eventually, of course, they got them back, and they got them back fairly quickly because it was one of the individual's sisters decided that they needed to check in on everybody, and what they found was a very unpleasant situation. So just bringing in the police, it kind of put the kibosh on it. The physical and mental effects of cocaine and amphetamines are similar. Cocaine is about twice as expensive. Cocaine gives a greater rush and more intense high than amphetamines, but amphetamines allow for more prolonged energy. Amphetamines effect last 6 to 9 times longer. Amphetamines are more likely to cause addiction. Amphetamines are synthetic stimulants that provide similar effects as cocaine, but cheaper and more prolonged. Amphetamines are called uppers, speed, crack, crystal, ice, shabu, and glass. Amphetamines are snorted. They are injected. Amphetamines are ingested orally. Worldwide, 33 million people used amphetamines and methamphetamines in 2003. Speed used to come in several forms: amphetamines, crosstops, white crosses, and cartwheels. Biphetamines are known as black beauties. Dexedrine is known as Dexies or beans. Benzedrine is known as bennies, and methadone has no nickname. Amphetamines were first synthesized in 1887. It was used by both sides during World War II. It was used as a diet pill in the 1950s and 1960s. The hippies fueled their psychedelic experience with street speed, marijuana, and LSD. Amphetamines became a Schedule II drug in 1970. Street chemists began producing crank, methamphetamine sulfate, and crystal, methamphetamine hydrochloride, in the 1980s and 1990s. These chemists were able to convert the active ingredients in cold medications, phenylpropanolamine, ephedrine, and pseudoephedrine into crank and crystal. In the 1990s, a new, stronger methamphetamine began to be produced called ice, glass, batu, or shabu. It was dextroisomer methamphetamine. This form later came to be known as crystal meth, tina, peanut butter, deadhead, chalk, tweak, yellow rock, glass, rose quartz, speed, and of course the term that I learned to use was deadhead. I learned that in the emergency room. Lucky me. Going back here, once upon a time, crystal meth wasn't all that popular. Methamphetamines were. Amphetamines, speed was very common. When my first wife left, she started working in a truck stop. And one of the things that she did was start pushing speed to the truck drivers. And she got caught, and the police wanted her to turn in her boyfriend, who was the supplier, and instead she got on a bus and left Indiana. She was in Indiana. She's my high school sweetheart. She left Indiana and came down to Texas, where I was stationed. So she got down there with a baggie full of, when I say a garbage bag full of marijuana and about 200 pills, 200 speed pills. And of course, I threw them all away because, well, I was in the military. By golly, I could get in a lot of trouble for that. I threw away $3,000 or $4,000 worth of drugs. And she called me all kinds of horrible things. But I wasn't. That would have been silly for me to. Anyway, let's not talk about it. The profile of the typical methamphetamine user is a white male, 19 to 40 in the West, and especially Hawaii. An equal number of women abuse the drugs as men. Meth is particularly rampant in the gay community, where it is the third most popular drug after alcohol and marijuana. Amphetamines can be cooked in laboratory facilities. Initially, biker gangs cooked the drugs, Hells Angels and the Gypsy Jokers. Recently, Mexican gangs have taken over the manufacture. The Hells Angels and Gypsy Jokers are all old and fat. And dead. There's a lot of them. I didn't have, it's kind of hard to use this stuff and stay alive for a very long period of time. The DEA estimates that there are over 300 ways to manufacture methamphetamine from pseudoephedrine, and for this reason, cold medicine has been controlled and put behind the counter. Snorting methamphetamine is more toxic to the nasal mucosa than snorting cocaine and may cause irritation and pain. The most intense high comes from injecting amphetamines directly into the bloodstream. Sclerosis and pain often result from the injection. Methamphetamine is extremely bitter and takes much longer to get the effect to the brain. Amphetamines last 4 to 6 hours as compared to 10 to 90 minutes for cocaine. Amphetamines force the increase of the neurotransmitters of norepinephrine, epinephrine, and dopamine because it forces the release of these neurotransmitters from terminal vesicles. It reverses the reabsorption pumps, forcing more neurotransmitters into the synapse. Enzymes that metabolize the neurotransmitters are blocked by amphetamines. I have a niece that married this young gentleman, and the only time I ever met him, he had just shaved all the hair off of his body. Well, remember the formication we were talking about before? So I'm thinking, well, this guy's an amphetamine user. He's a deadhead. And it wasn't more than 6 months later that he overdosed on cocaine. What had happened was he'd been using the cheaper methamphetamines, and she inherited some money, $20,000 from my father's estate, and he took some of it and he put it into cocaine, and the cocaine was stronger than the methamphetamines that he was used to, and he overdosed and killed himself. He overdosed. Had a heart attack, they said. Yeah, prolonged use of amphetamines reduces. Why would you shave your head? I mean, well, anyway, he shaved the hair on his legs, the hair on his arms. Okay. Prolonged use of amphetamines reduces the body's ability to produce the effective neurotransmitters. Research shows norepinephrine reduction as long as 6 months after drug use has ceased. Research also shows a 24% reduction of dopamine, resulting in difficulty feeling pleasure. Thus, after heavy use, for the individual to feel normal, they have to use the drug in order to feel normal. Norepinephrine levels are lower, and so is dopamine. Methamphetamine also causes a degeneration of serotonin-producing cells. Research of methamphetamine users found that they had an 11.3% reduction in the gray matter of their hippocampus, their cingulate gyrus, and their paralimbic cortices. These areas affect your craving, your mood, your emotions, and your memory. And that's what meth head is. However, brains on methamphetamines are actually larger due to the swelling. Remember, this stuff is toxic, and the brain, in order to try to protect itself, swells up. That's what it does. If you hit your arm, it swells up. If you sprain your ankle, it swells up. Why? It's trying to protect itself. The brain does exactly the same thing. Amphetamines cause increased energy, increased heart rate, raised body temperature, rapid respiration, higher blood pressure, dilation of bronchial vessels, appetite suppression. Binging on amphetamines can result in not sleeping for 3 to 10 days. Tolerance of amphetamine is fairly rapid and extreme. A normal dosage is 15 to 30 milligrams. Long-term users may use as much as 5,000 milligrams a day. Effects on these individuals: sleep deprivation, heart toxicity, blood vessel toxicity, severe malnutrition. Overdose may result in convulsions, hyperthermia, cardiovascular collapse. Unlike most drugs, amphetamines are abused as much or more by women than men. This may lead to use during pregnancy, which results in irritable baby syndrome, intolerance to light and touch, tremors, muscle coordination problems, abnormal reflexes, sucking and swallowing problems, disturbed sleep. Other problems that might occur for the baby born to a methamphetamine user is premature delivery, congenital deformities, clubfoot or limb abnormalities, gastric problems, intestines protruding into the stomach, placental separation and hemorrhage being potentially lethal to both mother and baby, intrauterine brain hemorrhage and stroke, HIV, hepatitis B and C, and other things that I've seen. More deformities from meth and cocaine usage than I have from anything else. Babies born with their heart outside their chest cavity, babies born without skulls. Well, anyway, these are some ugly memories, and you guys don't need to think about it. Well, what you need to understand is this can cause a lot worse problems than some of these simple problems that they're talking about. If the baby survives gestation, they may have developmental problems, growth and developmental delays, learning disabilities, increased incidence of ADHD, increased risks for rage disorder, greater incidence of SIDS. Disability rates range around 33%. And these are the ones that survive. A lot of them don't make it that far. A lot of them are never born. They're spontaneously aborted. Amphetamines produce mild, intense euphoria, alertness, sexual feelings, sense of well-being, and confidence. After prolonged use, irritability, paranoia, anxiety, aggression, mental confusion, poor judgment, impaired memory, hallucinations. Since amphetamines cause an abundance of neurotransmitters that mimic sexual gratification, using the drug becomes a substitute for sexual activity. Amphetamines will also produce violence in people prone to violence because the drug causes people to be suspicious, paranoid, and overconfident. This proclivity for violence among meth users can lead to child abuse and neglect. In Oregon in 2004, 1,850 meth labs were busted, and a full 80% of the child abuse and neglect cases involved meth users. Excessive amphetamine usage can lead to amphetamine psychosis, just as with cocaine. Hallucinations, loss of contact with reality, speech patterns that are indistinguishable from paranoid schizophrenia. Since these symptoms are caused by excessive dopamine released by the drug, psychotic episodes can be induced at fairly low doses in individuals prone to excess dopamine. Some individuals may have immediate psychosis, while others may use for years with no problem. Crystal meth seems to have the strongest effect on the brain chemistry, and since it has fewer cardiovascular effects, can be smoked in larger quantities. The result is more severe: paranoia, hallucinations, hypervigilant thinking, suicidal depression, addictive use. 9.4% of children 2 to 17 in the United States have been diagnosed with ADHD in their lifetime. 9.4%. That's about 1 out of every 10. 8.1% of U.S. adults between 18 and 44 have been diagnosed with ADHD. 129 million children worldwide, 7.2%, have been diagnosed with ADHD. In 2016, 6,100,000 children have been diagnosed with ADHD, up from 4,400,000 in 2003. ADHD is caused by a depletion of dopamine. Amphetamines are used to treat ADHD because they increase dopamine and block its metabolism. Ritalin had 10 million prescriptions. Adderall, 7.7 million prescriptions. Strattera, 5.8 million prescriptions. Cylert, we don't have any figures on that one. Amphetamines work on ADHD about 75% of the time. Research shows that children taking amphetamine therapy for ADHD in the long term have an increased risk of alcohol and drug abuse as adults. Half of children with ADHD have comorbid ODD, oppositional defiant disorder. If left untreated, these individuals are more likely to progress from more serious problems, stealing, vandalism, and arson. One of the main uses for amphetamines throughout the 20th century was as a diet pill, but every time a new drug hit the market, it seemed to cause its own set of problems. One such problem came with two amphetamines, phentermine and fenfluramine, marketed as Fen-Phen. Given in tandem, the drugs caused heart valve damage to select women. In 1999, the drugs were taken off the market, and actually my wife used those, and thank goodness she hasn't developed any problems. Stimulants are and have been used all over the world for centuries. Khat in the Middle East, betel nut in the Far East and Asia, yohimbe in Africa, and ephedra in the Mediterranean area. Khat is a mild stimulant found in the Middle East. Smuggling of this drug in the United States has become more prevalent as more and more immigrants from the area come into the United States. The key stimulant in the leaf is cathinone, which evaporates if the leaf isn't used within 48 hours after harvesting. This substance is said to produce an effect between caffeine and methamphetamine. Methcathinone is a synthetic version of cathinone. This drug is used extensively in the Horn of Africa and on the Arabian Peninsula. In Yemen, half the population uses khat, and a family may spend 1/3 of their income on the drug. And that's Yemen right here. This is Yemen. Oh, I don't have an arrow. Wait a minute. I'll get my arrow back. That's Yemen right there. Sana'a is the capital. This drug is a driving force of the economies of many of the countries in the area. The drug is used socially. Chronic khat use can cause physical exhaustion and suicidal depression when withdrawn. There's Somalia. There's Eritrea. Djibouti, it's right there. Oman, Saudi Arabia. Synthetic cathinone is known as methcathinone. While this is only found sparingly in the United States, it is much more common in Europe and in fact represents 20% of the illicit drug use in the Russian Republic. Methcathinone is much more intense than khat and is as addictive as methamphetamine. With this drug, there is more dopamine reduction, and so Parkinsonism is more common. Betel nuts come from the betel nut palm and are found all over southern Asia. It is used extensively in India, Pakistan, the Arab world, Taiwan, Malaysia, the Philippines, New Guinea, Polynesia, southern China, and Africa. Worldwide, 20 to 450 million people use this substance. And that's what betel nuts look like. In Taiwan, 17% of the women and 1% of the 17% of men and 1% of women use this substance. One recent controversy in Taiwan is the betel nut beauties, who man betel nut kiosks while dressed provocatively to attract male customers. Some authorities are demanding more modesty for fear of compromising public morals. And this is an outfit. It's one of the more conservative outfits I could find. You can type it into Google and look at the betel nut beauties if you like. The active ingredient in betel nuts is ericoline, which induces an increase of epinephrine and norepinephrine in the central nervous system. This causes a mild euphoria, excitation, and a decrease of fatigue. The juice of the nut is dark red and stains the mouth red to black, as attractive as that is. Ericoline and muscarine are fairly toxic and cause mouth and esophagus irritation that might lead to cancer in the area. About 7% of chronic users develop a cancer. In India, betel nuts are mixed with sweetened tobacco to make a product known as gutka. Yohimbine is the extract from the yohimbe tree found in Africa. The tree is a member of the coffee family, and the extract is bitter and spicy, and often brewed in a similar manner to coffee. The active ingredient in yohimbine is an alpha-2 adrenergic antagonist that increases the neurotransmitter norepinephrine. Yohimbine has been used for centuries as a mild aphrodisiac and a sexual rejuvenator. Yohimbine's sexual side effects seem to stem from its ability to increase penile blood flow. It has been used to treat erectile dysfunction and is reputed to induce sexual arousal in women. The drug does increase blood pressure and heart rate. Male enhancement products include male performance, yohimbe power, manpower, and Aphrodine. It is also found in Sobi Energy. That's funny thing. I was teaching this part of this class when I was at Ashford University in Clinton, and one of my students said, "My husband just bought some of that Sobi Energy stuff, so that's why he did it." And of course, she got mad, and I felt kind of bad. I had narked out her husband. Yohimbine serves as a local anesthetic. In larger doses, it may produce a mild euphoria and sometimes hallucinations. At toxic levels, it can produce paralysis of the respiratory system and death. Ephedra is a bush that grows in deserts all over the world. The drug that it produces is ephedrine. This drug is a mild to moderate stimulant that is used medicinally to treat asthma, narcolepsy, allergies, and low blood pressure. Ephedrine is also known as Marwith and Mahuang and has been used medicinally by the Chinese for 5,000 years. Ephedrine was first synthesized in 1885 and for decades was the only effective treatment for asthma. Ephedrine's effects are less severe than amphetamines, though a toxic level is more likely to lead to psychosis. Ephedrine and pseudoephedrine are the active ingredients in many cold products. They also make up the molecule that is converted to make methamphetamine and methcathinone. This substance has also been implicated in sports doping scandals, and so is banned by the NFL, and it's illegal in Ohio. The sale of cold remedies is now controlled to prevent the hoarding of enough of the substance to convert into the more destructive drugs. Caffeine is the most popular stimulant in the world. It's the most popular mood-altering drug in the world. It's the most popular habit-forming drug in the world. 85% of the people in the United States consume substantial amounts of caffeine every day, including me. Caffeine is naturally found in coffee, tea, and chocolate. Caffeine is put in many products to give us energy: soda pop, energy drinks, over-the-counter energy supplements. Water is the most widely consumed beverage in the world. Tea is the second most widely consumed beverage. Tea has been consumed in China for 4,700 years. Tea has become ritualized in many cultures like Japan and China. The English discovered tea from Portuguese traders, and the country became obsessed with it. To this day, 4 o'clock is tea time in England, when everyone stops and takes a spot of tea. Coffee was first cultivated in Ethiopia in 650 AD, and from there slowly spread into Europe, though along the way many cultures banned it as an intoxicant. In the United States, each coffee drinker consumes an average of 20 pounds of coffee a year. 8 ounces of brewed coffee will deliver about 135 milligrams of caffeine. 8 ounces of instant coffee will deliver about 95 milligrams of caffeine, and 8 ounces of decaf coffee will still deliver about 7 milligrams of caffeine. How much is 8 ounces? That's a cup. That's what, if you, a mug, if you go to the restaurant, that mug contains about 8 ounces of coffee. That's 135 milligrams of caffeine. Archaeological evidence indicates that indigenous people in Central America brewed coca products as early as 2,600 years ago. From the Mayans, this practice spread to the rest of South and Central American power brokers, the Aztecs, and Incans. Cocoa was originally marketed in Europe as an aphrodisiac, but soon became merely candy. Cocoa has a small amount of caffeine, but other active ingredients in the substance act as stimulants as well, and one of them is theobromine. In the late 19th and early 20th century, manufacturers of cola soft drinks replaced cocaine with caffeine as an energy booster. Some of the caffeine comes from the cola nut from the African cola tree, but most of it today comes from caffeine removed from decaffeinated coffee. Energy drinks began with the invention of Red Bull in 1987. 1987, that's not that long ago. Red Bull delivers 80 milligrams of caffeine in an 8.3 ounce can. Now remember, coffee is 130, here it is. 8 ounces of brewed coffee delivers 135 milligrams of caffeine. Red Bull also contains taurine, ginseng, guarana, glucose, B-complex vitamins, minerals, and carbohydrates. Sobe Adrenaline Rush also delivers 80 milligrams of caffeine in an 8.3 ounce can. Starbucks 2X shot delivers a whopping 105 milligrams of caffeine in just 6.5 ounce can, which is smaller than a cup of coffee, and it delivers just a little bit less. 12 ounces of Mountain Dew delivers 54 milligrams of caffeine, and that's what I'm drinking right now, Code Red. And it's Code Red. It's not It's not Diet Code Red, because I lifted today. 12 ounces of Dr. Pepper delivers 41 milligrams of caffeine. 12 ounces of Pepsi Cola delivers 38 milligrams of caffeine. 12 ounces of Coca-Cola delivers 35 milligrams of caffeine. 16 ounces of Rockstar delivers 240 milligrams of caffeine. 16 ounces of Full Throttle delivers 200 milligrams of caffeine. 16 ounces of Monster delivers 160 milligrams of caffeine. 16 ounces of Mountain Dew Kickstart delivers 90 milligrams of caffeine. A new phenomenon that has hit the bar scene is to drink vodka mixed with Red Bull. This is a drink called Birch. It is reputed that this mixture will slow the process of getting drunk and result in less of a hangover the next morning. Both of those are untrue. It actually gets you drunk faster, and you get just as much of a hangover as you would anyway. Remember, Red Bull's got sugar in it, and sugar accelerates the alcohol into your system. So any mixed drink, any fruity mixed drink that tastes sweet will probably get you drunk pretty fast, and you'll probably have a hangover, pretty good hangover the next day. Deaths due to overconsumption of Red Bull have led to banning the drink in several countries. It's illegal in France, Denmark, and Canada. Guarana is the national drink of Brazil. Guarana comes from the guarana shrub, which produces beans that have about 2 times the caffeine as coffee beans. The Brazilian drink normally delivers about 30 ounces of 30 milligrams of caffeine in a 12-ounce can. Mate is a plant whose leaves are brewed like tea. Mate is the national drink of Argentina and delivers between 35 to 130 milligrams of caffeine per 8-ounce serving. 3% of the world's caffeine comes from mate. The rest of it comes from coffee. Caffeine is a very bitter chemical. It's an alkaloid in a class of chemicals called xanthines. It is found in more than 60 plants around the world. The half-life of caffeine is 3 to 7 hours. It takes 15 to 35 hours for caffeine to completely clear the system. Swedes average 425 milligrams of caffeine per day. The English average 445 milligrams of caffeine per day. Americans only average 211 milligrams of caffeine a day. 17% of it comes from tea, 16% is from soft drinks, 60% is from coffee. About half of all Americans drink 3.3 cups of coffee a day. 20% of U.S. adults consume more than 350 milligrams of caffeine per day. 3% of U.S. adults drink more than 650 milligrams of caffeine per day. 65% of the 450 different soft drinks produced in the United States contain caffeine, including all Mountain Dew products. Caffeine is used in several prescriptions and over-the-counter medications, in bronchodilators, decongestants, diuretics, analgesics, alertness aids, appetite suppressants, menstrual pain controllers. As a vasoconstrictor, it can work on migraine headaches. Caffeine works by inhibiting the effect of adenosine. Adenosine is a neuromodulator that depresses your mood, induces sleep, has anticonvulsant properties, causes low blood pressure, slows the heart rate, and dilates the blood vessels. So when you take caffeine, it reverses that whole process. Caffeine's effect is controlled by heredity, and I'm saying that because caffeine doesn't affect me, doesn't affect my son, didn't affect my father, but it did affect my mother, and it also affected my brother to the extent that one time my brother was driving from Muncie, Indiana to Norfolk, Virginia. He was trying to make it in 24 hours, which was possible. It's not that far. He usually could make it in 12 to 14 hours. And he was tired, and so he decided he didn't drink coffee. What he decided to do was drink a 20-ounce bottle of Mountain Dew and kind of savor it, so that it would be a lot slower than drinking a cup of coffee. So he started drinking this Mountain Dew someplace in Pennsylvania while he was getting tired. And the next thing he knew, he was in Maine. He had taken a wrong turn, and he had hallucinated and ended up in Maine. And it took him a couple days to figure out what in the world was going on. He was that sensitive to Mountain Dew. And of course, I drink it all the time. So we're different, me and my brother. To those sensitive to caffeine, 350 milligrams per day may cause anxiety, insomnia. It doesn't wake me up. It doesn't do anything to me. I can drink one just before I go to bed and have no problem sleeping throughout the night. Anxiety, insomnia, gastric irritation, high blood pressure, nervousness, and flushed face. This did this to my mother. It gave her high blood pressure. So she was, and my mother was a Depression era person. So she hated to see anything go to waste. And one time she was sitting there with my dad, and my dad drank half of his coffee, and then he decided he'd go to bed. So the rest of the cup was sitting there, so she drank the rest of it and went to bed. Of course, she had heart palpitations. They had to take her to the hospital. It was really kind of interesting. So she couldn't drink any caffeine for the rest of her life. One study where subjects were given 500 milligrams of caffeine showed a 32% elevation of the stress hormones for an extended period of time. Caffeine is lethal at 10 grams. That's 100 cups of coffee or 185 cans of Mountain Dew. I don't think I could do that. Drink 185 cans of it. In susceptible people, too much caffeine can trigger nervousness. Caffeine is one of the substances that people prone to panic attacks should avoid. Counselors should ask their clients about their caffeine consumption, as sensitivity and excess amounts might create artificial anxiety. And this may be one of the reasons for anxiety in the United States. Something to think about, something to remember. Excess caffeine consumption can lower the fertility in women. 350 milligrams per day will not only make it less likely that a woman will get pregnant, but will double the chance of a miscarriage. Excessive caffeine consumption has also been implicated in a woman's developing benign lumps in her breasts. Researchers also feel that caffeine may make it difficult to lose weight because caffeine triggers the release of insulin, which metabolizes sugar and in turn creates deficits in the blood, which causes hunger. Since there are a number of different hereditary structures that dictate sensitivity and tolerance to caffeine, talking about amounts and effects varies from one individual to another. High caffeine consumers may actually get sleepy when only consuming small amounts of the substance because it activates the adenosine receptor sites. Withdrawal symptoms from caffeine, and I've done this 2 or 3 times in my life. I've just decided to not drink any more caffeine. After 12 to 24 hours of abstinence and peak after 24 to 48 hours, these are the symptoms that I've never had, despite the fact that I drink a lot of caffeine. I've never had any of these symptoms when I went off the stuff. The symptoms can last for 2 days to a week. Throbbing headache, that's the most common. Sleepiness, fatigue, lethargy, depression, decreased alertness, sleep problems, irritability, flu-like symptoms, nausea, vomiting, muscle pains, or stiffness. Nicotine comes from the leaves of the tobacco plant. The tobacco plant is a member of the nightshade family, which also includes tomatoes, belladonna, henbane, and petunias. In the United States, 90% of the tobacco is delivered to users as cigarettes. In India, 85% of all men use tobacco in the form of chewing tobacco. As weird as that is, or different as that is. I guess it's not weird if you're from India. Tobacco came to the Old World from the Americas, and it originally was smoked in pipes. In the 18th century, people began chewing the leaves and snorting the powder into their noses as snuff. Smokeless tobacco continued to be the most popular use of tobacco until World War I. Around World War I, packaged cigarettes became popular in the trenches of Europe. This was possible because cigarette rolling machines improved. Cigarettes used a milder form of tobacco, which allowed deeper inhalation of the tobacco. Mass production produced lower prices. Advertising popularized the product. More aggressive marketing brought the product around the world. Heavy smokers in the United States will smoke 20 to 40 cigarettes per day. U.S. tobacco users spend $89 billion a year on tobacco products. 24.9% of the population over 12, that's 60.5 million Americans, smoked cigarettes in the past month. 51 million Americans smoke cigarettes every day. 13.6 million Americans smoke cigars every day. 2.2 million Americans smoke tobacco in pipes every day. 7.7 million Americans use smokeless tobacco every day. Smokeless tobacco comes in 3 forms. Moist snuff that is put in the mouth next to the gums. powdered or dry snuff, which is drawn up the nose, loose leaf chew, which is put in the mouth and chewed. Okay, one of the things that you need to know about moist snuff, like Copenhagen, it has fiberglass in it, and the reason it gets into your system so rapidly is because the fiberglass makes these micro tears in your gums, and that's the reason that it becomes so addictive, because of that fiberglass. Isn't that cute? The active ingredient in tobacco is nicotine. Nicotine is a highly poisonous alkaloid that is bitter, smelly, and colorless. Tobacco leaves hold 2 to 5% nicotine. Smoking tobacco delivers nicotine to the brain in 5 to 8 seconds. Smokeless tobacco delivers nicotine to the brain in 3 to 8 minutes. Cigarettes contain 10 milligrams of nicotine, but a typical smoker will only get 1 to 3 milligrams into their system with one cigarette, and that's because they spend most of the time holding the cigarette and not smoking it. 70 milligrams of nicotine is fatal, so if you smoke 7 cigarettes and suck those things down, then potentially you'll poison yourself and you will die. Chewing tobacco will deliver 4.5 milligrams of nicotine to the brain, while snuff will deliver 3.5 milligrams to the brain. The first cigarette of the day will raise the heart rate by 10 to 20 beats and the blood pressure by 5 to 10 units. Nicotine affects the central nervous system and disrupts the following neurotransmitters: endorphins, epinephrine, norepinephrine, dopamine, and acetylcholine. Nicotine mimics acetylcholine-filling nicotinic acetylcholine receptor sites, exaggerating the cholinergic effects, increasing your heart rate, your blood pressure, your memory. It actually makes you remember things better, learning, reflexes, aggression, sleep, sexual activity, and mental acuity. Dopamine makes a smoker feel satisfied and calm. Thus, a cigarette both excites and tranquilizes at the same time. People continue to take the tobacco toxins because it is a social ritual. There is also a ritual aspect to the lighting up and smoking. Smoking is perceived as an adult activity. It manipulates your mood, increases your dopamine level. It appears to be rebellious. It is sexually attractive. It controls your appetite, leading to weight loss. Nicotine is craved. Nicotine suppresses the appetite and increases metabolism. The average smoker weighs 6 to 9 pounds lighter than a same-size non-smoker. It may be the fear of putting on weight that keeps some smokers from stopping. Smokers may also be self-medicating to combat depression. Smokers are twice as likely as non-smokers to experience major depression. Smokers who have experienced at least one major episode of depression are less likely to succeed in smoking cessation. Nicotine creates an intense craving when a select level is not maintained in the bloodstream and the brain. The mere act of lighting up activates the nucleus accumbens, giving the smoker a sense of reward. The rush is similar to the feeling that a heroin user gets when they relapse after an abstinent period. This use to escape withdrawal symptoms is called negative drug reinforcement. Only a few hours of smoking leads to neural adaptation to the toxicity of the nicotine. The first morning hit after a long night's sleep is said to feel especially rush-like as the individual builds the nicotine level back to their daytime norm. Unlike other drugs, nicotine does not continue to build up a tolerance, but the smoker finds a level of comfort that they attempt to maintain. Withdrawal from nicotine causes headaches, nervousness, fatigue, hunger, severe irritability, poor concentration, depression, increased appetite, sleep disturbances, intense nicotine craving. The individual has experienced a true physiological dependence as the individual has created an excess number of nicotinic acetylcholine receptors that are screaming to be occupied. Without the nicotine to occupy these sites, the result is irritability and discontent. The smoker needs the tobacco to feel normal. Researchers now realize that the feelings of relaxation and well-being that smokers feel when they light up is actually the feeling of having the withdrawal symptoms subdued. Nicotine addiction is a more powerful addiction than any other. While 23 million people have tried cocaine, only 600,000 people are weekly users and a rare few on a daily basis. 72 million people have tried marijuana, but only 6.8 million use on a weekly basis and only a fraction on a daily basis. 198 million people have tried alcohol, but only 48 million use it weekly and only 20 million on a daily basis. 162 million people have tried tobacco, 60 million smoke weekly, and 37 million smoke daily. Nearly 1/4 of the people who try tobacco continue to use the drug daily as compared to the fractions with other drugs and 10% of the people using alcohol. 80% of smokers say they want to quit. 10% want to limit the amount they smoke. Only 10% of smokers want to continue, yet 100% do continue to smoke or chew. Other countries have more serious problems with tobacco than the United States. China's use is 50% higher. England's use is 40% higher. Japan's use is 50% higher. Globally, 12% of women and 47% of men smoke. There may be a predilection to use tobacco. The DRD2A1 allele is seen as the culprit. A teen who smokes is 3 times more likely to abuse alcohol, 8 times more likely to abuse marijuana, 22 times more likely to abuse cocaine. Only 8% of black teens use tobacco, 15.7% of Hispanic teens use tobacco, 25.7% of white teens use tobacco. Nicotine contains from 4,000 to 48,000 chemicals. 400 are toxins, 69 are known cancer-causing substances. Worldwide, it is estimated that smoking causes 5 million premature deaths every year. 392,000 of these people are in the United States, 264,000 men, and 178,000 women. Lung cancer, heart disease, and lung disease are the result of smoking tobacco. An additional 50,000 people die from secondhand smoke. 8.6 million Americans have at least one serious illness caused by smoking. It is estimated that a smoker loses 10 years off their life. Smoking accelerates the process of atherosclerosis by increasing low-density fats, increasing blood coagulability, triggering cardiac arrhythmias, reducing microrespiratory function by introducing carbon monoxide into the bloodstream. Carbon monoxide has a 230 times greater affinity to red blood cells than does hemoglobin, which means that if carbon monoxide is present, then it will attach itself to the red blood cell. That red blood cell will never function properly again. And that's one of the reasons why even just a little bit of carbon monoxide can cause carbon monoxide poisoning, because it has a 230 times greater affinity for hemoglobin than does oxygen. It is a vasoconstrictor. We're talking about nicotine here. 1/3 of all the smoking deaths are due to cardiovascular disease, 350,000 of these from secondhand smoke. Bronchopulmonary disease are far more prevalent among smokers than non-smokers. That includes emphysema, chronic bronchitis, and COPD, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Children who live with smokers suffer from more asthma, colds, and bronchitis. 80 to 90% of all COPD deaths are due to smoking. Men who smoke are 22 times more likely to develop lung cancer than men who don't. Women who smoke are 12 times more likely to develop lung cancer than women who don't. 85% of men and 75% of women with lung cancer smoke. I'm not going to read the rest. That's a joke. About 15% of mothers smoke during pregnancy. Nicotine and the byproduct carbon monoxide change some of the positive properties in the blood. Carbon monoxide blocks oxygen transport. Nicotine makes platelets more sticky, increasing the possibility of a clot forming. Let me repeat that. Nicotine makes platelets more sticky, increasing the possibility of a clot forming. So when I was young, I used to read the obituaries, and I don't know why I did. Maybe I'm macabre or something. But, and of course, when I was young, this was in the early 50s, and a lot of people smoked. And a lot of these people were dying in their 40s and 50s from strokes and from lung cancer. The ones that were dying from strokes is because nicotine makes platelets more sticky. And there you go. They have a higher incidence of SIDS. Babies born to smokers have a lower birth weight. They have a higher incidence of SIDS. Women who smoke during pregnancy are twice as likely to miscarry and have spontaneous abortions as non-smokers. Children whose mothers smoke during pregnancy have a 4 times greater chance of having ADHD, conduct disorder, drug dependence, asthma, chronic bronchitis, chronic respiratory symptoms. Smokeless tobacco can be as addicting as smoking, because tobacco in smokeless tobacco forms contains more nicotine than smoked tobacco. People use more smokeless tobacco when they use. Smokeless tobacco has a higher pH, allowing it to pass into the capillaries more readily. One dip of smokeless tobacco delivers the same amount of nicotine as 3 to 4 cigarettes. At least the dipper is less likely to get lung cancer. However, the gums are inflamed from causing more dental problems. They have a higher risk of oral cancer, pharyngeal cancer, esophageal cancer, cheek cancer, and gum cancer. My neighbor back in Indiana used to chew tobacco because it was cool and he was cool. And one of the things, and he's a judge. This guy's not a dummy. He's a judge. And what happened to him? He chewed tobacco and he got pharyngeal cancer and cheek cancer and gum cancer. So they had to take the muscles of his neck on the left side of his body. They had to take it out. And so he has his chin permanently on his chest. Freud was a notorious cigar smoker, and it caused cheek cancer, and they had to take out his part of his jaw, so the left part of his jaw. So they had to put a prosthesis in there. Very painful for him. So the last years of Freud's life, he had this prosthesis in his jaw. That's why you see, if you see him in the 1930s, yeah, he looks different. Famous singer of the 50s, Nat King Cole was one of the first African American TV stars. He was a heavy smoker. Nat King Cole died of lung cancer at age 45. A leading man of the 60s and 70s, Steve McQueen starred in such movies as The Great Escape and The Sand Pebbles. A heavy smoker all his life, McQueen died of lung cancer at age 50. And Steve McQueen was from Indianapolis, Indiana, right down the street from where I'm from. One of the blonde bombshells of the 40s and 50s, Betty Grable, was a famous pinup from World War II. For World War II soldiers, they liked her sexy legs. As you can see, she had sexy legs. A smoker to keep her figure, Gable died of lung cancer at age 56. Known for his raspy voice and tough guy image, Humphrey Bogart, starred in films in the 40s and 50s in such films as Casablanca and The Maltese Falcon. His heavy smoking caught up with him in 1956 when he died of lung cancer at age 57. Known as the youngest Beatle, George Harrison was the first to die, naturally, at age 58 from lung cancer. John Lennon was murdered in 1980. Harrison was a smoker and a toker most of his life, and he died at age 58. This is George, Ringo, Paul, John. That's him later on, before he died. Benefits of quitting using tobacco: 20 minutes after quitting, blood pressure and pulse rate drop, and the feet and hands will warm to normal temperatures. Remember, it's a vasoconstrictor, so it keeps your extremities cold. Within 8 hours, the carbon monoxide level in the blood drops and oxygen levels increase, both to normal. Within 24 hours, the risk of sudden heart attack decreases. Within 48 hours, the nerve endings adjust to the absence of nicotine, while the sense of taste and smell will return. And that is a chronic problem of people that smoke. They can't smell anything and they can't taste anything. Within 1 week, breathing improves and constricted blood vessels begin to relax. Within 2 to 12 weeks, circulation improves, lung function increases up to 30%, and the complexion begins looking healthy again. Healthy, unhealthy, healthy, unhealthy. Within 1 to 9 months, fatigue, coughing, sinus congestion, and shortness of breath decreases, and lungs increase their ability to handle mucus. Within 1 year, the risk of coronary heart disease has been cut in half. Within 5 years, the heart disease rate has become that of a non-smoker. Within 10 years, the lung cancer rate drops to just above that of a non-smoker. Within 10 to 15 years, the disease rate has returned to that of a non-smoker. And that is the end of the chapter. So there you go. All those ugly stories about all these horrible problems that people have from stimulants. And I will talk to you next week. Well, maybe I won't talk to you next week. I don't know. I don't know what my schedule is.